Russia's foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, has issued a dire warning that the next world war will be a nuclear war and it will be a destructive one. Now, some are saying that is a thinly veiled threat. And I think that's a fair assessment. Russia invaded Ukraine. And now if people want to stop them from doing it, it's, but there could be a nuclear war. Belarus is allowing Russia to stage nuclear weapons in its territory. And Ukraine has accused Belarus of invading Ukraine along with Russia in their war effort. Certainly things are heating up. But the real question remains, who's winning? Now, if you go online and look up the news, you'll find story after story claiming that Russia is losing. They're suffering greatly. Russian soldiers saying, we didn't know. We were forced into this war, being captured. Videos of alleged POWs. But my friends, it is all propaganda. We don't know exactly what's going on. We see these videos of shellings and bombings. We don't know who is launching what. You can believe your side. You can believe their side. You can believe neither side. I honestly don't know what to tell you. I can show you what the media is reporting, and I can give you my personal assessment. Based on everything I know about what is currently happening, it stands to reason that Ukraine is losing. Why wouldn't they? I mean, we're talking about Russia, which has around half the force, militaristic force, of NATO. Ukraine on its own is not going to be standing up to Russia. But of course, they need to maintain morale. They need to make sure that people in Ukraine believe they can win, so they stage a resistance. And I absolutely can respect that. I, however, am no fan of propaganda and lies. At the same time, what you need to be concerned about is that they will manipulate you, someone from the United States or from the West. They'll manipulate you emotionally so that you go on to support intervention in Ukraine. And it's a really difficult position. It always is. I am not a staunch anti-interventionalist or isolationist, I should say. I'm mostly opposed to intervention. The conflict between Russia and Ukraine, while awful, is a conflict between Russia and Ukraine. Why should the United States be involved in this? Well, of course, you'll hear in media terrifying stories of Russian soldiers killing civilians indiscriminately. And they will look you in the eyes and say, we have to stop this evil. Now, I certainly believe civilians being killed is a bad thing. But I don't necessarily trust anyone trying to get us to engage in warfare. The reality is they want to play to your emotions so that you rally to their side and then go to war. At the same time, we're hearing that in the West, major corporations are actually targeting civilians, celebrities, athletes. They're shutting down payment processing for Russian civilians. And we have one high-profile individual saying there are no innocent Russians right now. So the West targets Russian civilians in very different ways. And you know, there's hard questions about this. The civilians are being effectively sanctioned, being removed from video games or banned from travel. Okay, they're not being killed. And then I get civilians do play a role in facilitating war, even if they don't want it. When it comes to what's happening with Russia, civilians are actually dying. But I have to say, I do not believe that we live in a world of comic book villains. Unless, of course, you're reading like a Frank Miller graphic novel or something. But for the most part, no. Vladimir Putin did not twirl his figurative mustache and say, go and kill the civilians. But it is true that in war there is collateral damage. And Vladimir Putin is the one who chose to invade Ukraine. For whatever reason he may have, he chose to invade. And that means the civilian deaths and collateral damage will be on him. And therein lies the big challenge. How do we stop this? And people will argue intervention. I don't know for sure. I've seen conservatives saying, arm the Ukrainians, but don't get directly involved. And I can understand that for sure. There are reports of certain Baltic states and Eastern European countries that are providing resources to the Ukrainians. And there are some questions as to whether or not we have already crossed the line into providing direct support, NATO, I should say, for Ukraine. Suffice it to say, my friends, the prospect of World War III is a legitimate concern. And Russia will not back down. I don't believe they'll simply say, well, you got us. They have sacrificed so much for this. The sanctions are heavy, and Putin knew it. And now, according to Russian state media, Vladimir Putin's approval is through the roof. And it may be, or it could all be propaganda. I don't know for sure. Personally, I err on the side of Ukraine and have always. Why? Well, I know people from there. They're the ones being invaded, and I oppose war. Putin started it. The people that I know in Ukraine talk about a dire circumstance, war and conflict, and very, very disgusting things that we're seeing as it pertains to the actions of Russia. But don't come to me with these crying translators and this manipulation. Be honest. And it's simple. Russia invaded Ukraine. That's wrong. I don't like the propaganda, but let's read. I want to show you what we're seeing. We're actually seeing many Western sources say Russia is winning. We're seeing sources saying Russia is losing. We're seeing some that say Russia has already lost, but they're going to win anyway. It's all just insanity, propaganda, fog of war, and confusion. But I'll do my best to break down with a few key points what's currently happening in the war and how the West is sanctioning people in Russia, civilians, and what appears to be an admission by Joe Biden in the State of the Union address that Taiwan will fall to China. Before we get started, head over to timcast.com and become a member in order to support the work of our journalists as well as the work that I do here. As a member, you'll get access to exclusive members-only segments on the Timcast IRL podcast, and you will, again, make sure our journalists can go on the ground. For instance, we have Elad out on the ground with the People's Convoy tracking this protest as it makes its way to Washington, D.C. That's all thanks to you. So don't forget to smash that like button, subscribe to this channel, share the show with your friends. Let's talk about the current updates on a potential threat of World War III. Now, I will first start by saying many people are like, Tim keeps talking about nuclear war. Well, yeah, I mean, isn't it the most pertinent issue? Should I ignore the prospect of serious international conflict to talk about lesser known stories involved in this conflict, or should I highlight what may be the most pressing issue, the aversion of any war by any means possible? Of course, I suppose I could not talk about World War III or whatever, but it's the narrative that's everywhere. So I don't know what to tell you. Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. The Daily Mail reports Russia's foreign minister warns a third world war will be nuclear and destructive. In a thinly veiled threat for NATO not to get involved in Ukraine, Lavrov said that any future world war will be fought with nuclear weapons, a statement that comes just days after President Vladimir Putin warned that any country sending troops to Ukraine would be met with severe consequences. The foreign minister went on to claim that Moscow was ready to enter a second round of negotiations aimed at achieving peace in Ukraine and accused Kiev of deliberately delaying the process at the request of the United States. We are ready for the second round of negotiations, but the Ukrainian side is delaying at the behest of the Americans, said Lavrov. His statement came after U.S. President Joe Biden said yesterday, President Joe Biden yesterday used his State of the Union address to brand Putin as a Russian dictator and declare that Moscow is more isolated than ever, as he added to already strict Western sanctions with the closure of U.S. airspace to all Russian flights. A Russian source close to negotiations said that the second round of talks was supposed to take place later today, close to the Belarusian-Polish border, after an initial attempt at diplomacy concluded on Monday. Lavrov this morning also sought to justify the invasion of Ukraine by saying Russia's forces will not allow Ukraine to obtain nuclear weapons. Now, I gotta say, I'm gonna call BS on that one. First, yes, World War III, I believe, will be nuclear. It is stated that I suppose it's a Strauss-Howe generational theory that every conflict will be fought with the most powerful weapons at the time. Of course, this includes social media and propaganda, which we are witnessing, but it does include nuclear weapons. And I believe Russia has the capability and the willingness to use them if they have to. I don't think that's a thinly veiled threat necessarily. You have Lavrov basically telling you the truth. If this escalates into world war, nukes will be used. That's scary stuff, man. But don't play this way, Ukraine could obtain nuclear weapons. I do not believe that Russia genuinely fears that. I believe Russia is angry they're losing the influence war, and that Ukraine is more interested in joining with the EU, especially now more than ever. And that means Russia had no choice because their influence had waned and their cultural influence had waned, but to go in boots on the ground. I think it was a mistake, but they put us and everyone else in a very screwed up position. Engage a madman and face nuclear war, or allow him to invade and take Ukraine? Rock in a hard place. I don't like the idea of sitting back and letting it happen. but I really do not like the idea of engaging, intervening in a foreign war, country not on our borders, and then potentially starting World War III. But the risk remains that if Russia is not satisfied and they do enter Moldova or even press on Poland, then we have World War III no matter what we want. That's the dangerous reality of this. Now, in this story from the Daily Mail, an op-ed, Putin is not crazy, and the Russian invasion is not failing. The West's delusions about this war and its failure to understand the enemy will prevent it from saving Ukraine, writes military analyst Bill Roggio. I completely agree. Bill Roggio is a senior fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies and editor at FDD's Long War Journal. From 91 to 97, Roggio served as a signalman and infantryman in the U.S. Army and New Jersey National Guard, and I think he's correct. We don't understand Russia. When Tucker Carlson tries to come out and say, here's what Putin is thinking, he gets mocked and says he's pushing Putin's talking points. No, we need to understand the enemy if we're going to win this one. And I think when you understand the enemy, you'll realize they're willing to sacrifice everything for what they want, be it favorable oil policies, be it more resources for their homeland, and be it the rebuilding of the Russian Empire. Bill says, a more sober analysis shows that Russia may have sought a knockout blow, but always had well-laid plans for follow-on assaults if its initial moves proved insufficient. The world has underestimated Putin before, and those mistakes have led in part to this tragedy in Ukraine. We must be clear-eyed now that the war is underway. Yet even the professionals at the Pentagon are letting sympathy cloud their judgment. Just 2 days into Russia's invasion of Ukraine, the DoD briefers were quick to claim that failing to take Kiev in the opening days of the war amounted to a serious setback. DoD briefers implied that Russia's offensive was well behind schedule or had even failed because the capital had not fallen. But U.S. leaders should have learned to restrain their hopes after the catastrophic withdrawal from Afghanistan. Once again, U.S. and Western officials are falling into the trap of failing to understand the enemy and his objectives. Allegedly, Putin believed that the Ukrainian government would collapse once Russian troops crossed the frontier and pushed into Kiev, and that the operation has failed because the Ukrainian government remains in place. Putin certainly hoped for a swift victory, but he clearly was not relying on his opening salvo as the only plan for success. Rather, the Russian military prepared to take the country by force if a swift decapitation strike fell short. This kind of plan should be familiar to Americans who remember the invasion of Iraq. In the first hours of the war, the U.S. Air Force launched its shock and awe campaign in an attempt to kill Saddam and other key leaders and bring down the government. Saddam survived, but the U.S. military was fully prepared to follow up with a ground assault. A look at the Russian military offensive demonstrates there was a plan for a full-scale invasion, which Russia is now executing. Conventional mechanized warfare is a time and resource-consuming enterprise, and an operation of this scope isn't cobbled together in days. The Russian offensive is taking place on 4 separate fronts. On a 5th front in eastern Ukraine, which Putin declared independent last week, Russian forces are tying down Ukrainian troops that are needed elsewhere. The bulk of the Russian forces are advancing southward from Belarus to Kiev. Russian advanced forces, including air, mobile, and reconnaissance troops, have been engaged with Ukrainian troops outside Kiev since the start of the war. A massive column of Russian troops, estimated at over 40 miles long, is just 20 miles north of Kiev and is likely assembling to surround the capital. If Russian forces can take Kiev and push southward to link up with force on the Crimean front, thus splitting Ukraine in two, it would be a major blow to the Zelensky government. What matters more than a handful of setbacks is that Russian forces have pushed 70 miles into contested terrain in less than a week and are on the outskirts of the capital. So they can come out and they can say all that they want to say about Russia losing, but my friends, it's getting bad. In this post from the command of the Special Operations Forces of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, they have said, from now on, there will be no more captured Russian artillerymen, no mercy, no please do not kill, I surrender, will not pass. Each calculation, no matter, commander, driver, gunner, loader, will be slaughtered like pigs. Piss in your pants. We've already come for you. Some have stated, this is a declaration of war crimes. You want to talk about what war really is, my friends, you're reading it. And I'm not talking about Putin getting any special passes. Certainly there are accusations of war crimes on his assaults as well. But war crimes only exist in this farcical idea of gentlemanly global conflict. If Vladimir Putin wants to take Ukraine, do you think he will stop at the sight of there's a child in a building? I certainly don't think so, and civilians have died. It's disgusting, and that's why I think Ukraine does need some kind of support. What that is, I don't know. And I certainly think Russia is in the wrong to an extreme degree. For Ukraine to come out now and take this stance shows you what really matters. What matters is winning by any means necessary. So you can come out and say in the articles of the Hague or the Geneva Conventions, we agree to this, that, or otherwise. Then go look at actual war. Yeah. This idea of, oh, but if we do engage in war, we'll follow these rules. BS. The U.S. launched missile strikes. Trump did because of gas attacks on civilians. When it comes to warfare, you think despots or desperate people care? Do you think they're going to sit back and say, you know, I might lose this one, and so be it because I don't want to cross the line my enemy has set for me? Do you think Russia cares about the Geneva Conventions? No, they want to win. They don't care about the opinions of NATO or Brussels. They want to win. Do you think Ukraine cares? They're not a member of NATO. They're being crushed by Russia and very well may lose. You think they care about your rules? They are going to parade around POWs. They are going to make... Here we go. We were sent as cannon fodder. We're killing peaceful people. Weeping Russian POWs say they had no idea. They were being sent to a war and were made to attack people defending their territory. I believe to a degree that's true. As we already read, Russia probably thought they'd go in and people would be like, I don't want to fight. They thought it would be like Crimea, perhaps. Now, I don't believe it's completely true because in Donetsk and Luhansk, the Donbass region, there's resistance. Russia certainly must have known this would happen. Maybe these troops didn't know. But I'll tell you what gets me is Ukraine using POWs on camera for propaganda. Not a fan. State your case. Mention you've captured POWs. But I'm not a fan of this propaganda stuff. But as I stated, do you think they care? Now, according to the Geneva Conventions, there is something about keeping POWs out of public curiosity. I don't know if this qualifies. Some have said using POWs for propaganda purposes is wrong. I don't know. I can just say it's not so simple to claim that we know how this is going to play out. Nobody does. I do think it's fair to say Russia has a substantially larger military, and by any reasonable assessment should likely win this conflict and get what they want. That is to say, maybe with some collateral damage. But where are we? Where are we? CNBC reports Ukraine is winning the information war against Russia. To a certain degree, for sure, but they're being aided by Western agencies as well as private groups. You may have seen that I was trending on Twitter. Yes, there are bots and sock puppets. They exist, and they want you to be manipulated emotionally in supporting their war. They think they can manipulate me into backing off of my opinions. Shove it. It ain't going to happen. I heavily criticized a clip from CNN of a translator crying as Zelensky says that we don't want our children to die. I respect the statement from Zelensky 100%. He's correct. I don't believe that Zelensky saying war is wrong and civilians should not die. I don't see that as an appeal to emotion. I see that as an appeal to reason, logic, and goodness. The appeal to emotion that I criticized was when the interpreter began crying, because it wasn't the first time we've seen this. Similar thing happened with a German translator who began crying when reading a statement from Zelensky. I will not be manipulated by your crying translators or your propaganda. I will certainly call it out, but it's bad. It's bad for the West. I get it. I don't care. I want Ukraine to win this one. I want Zelensky to win this one. I want Putin to back off. I want him out of Ukraine. But you will not earn my respect by trying to trick me into supporting your intervention in this conflict. You want to come to me and say, we laid out the case, and here's the issue, and I will say, I get it. And I'll tell you right now, it's very simple to me. I believe in justice. And I've seen Russia invade Ukraine, and they're wrong. They started a fight they should not be involved in. The people of Ukraine should not be dealing with this. But again, it's propaganda, it's manipulation. Displaying POWs, I find disgusting. Ukraine winning the war, they say. CNBC reports Ukraine is winning the war for hearts and minds. as its soldiers and civilians fight back against Russian forces. The victory at this early stage gives it some on-the-ground advantages, like stronger support from countries sympathetic to its cause. Fact. Russia's information battle seems to be very different from Ukraine's, as it struggles to quell opposition at home. Also true. We're hearing that Russian state media, look at this one. Russian trust in Putin has surged since the invasion of Ukraine. Study claims support is up from 60 to 71%. But they say the firm that did it is state-owned, so I don't know. Why should I trust CNN? Certainly, I'm not going to trust RT or Sputnik or Russia's media. I certainly would like to hear what they're saying and then make my own assessment. I don't like propaganda. I like honesty, facts, and it's simple. Russia invaded. We're done. We're done. I don't see I don't see a need for any other propaganda to be like Russia invaded this country. Perhaps they're trying to drum up support, but claiming there's a genocide going on so that we agree with a U.S. boots on the ground invasion. We got U.S. troops in Poland, and they're probably providing some support already. I just don't want to see this become a nuclear war. Now take a look at this from the BBC. Russian news agency deletes victory editorial. This one's fascinating. The BBC reports a Russian news agency has published and deleted an article prematurely praising Russia's success in invading Ukraine. I've seen the Internet Archive translated it. It's very strange. Maybe they were getting ready for what's called a pre-write. Someone writes an article, and then as soon as news breaks, they can publish it, and it's ready to go. Pre-writes are considered very unethical. But typically, people do it for obituaries, which is mostly fine. You prepare an obituary. But pre-writes are typically considered wrong. You write 2 articles, you wait for an outcome, you publish 1. Creepy. Seems like Russia is playing the propaganda game. Let's be real. They have every reason to do so. But I also want to say that people have a right to knowledge. They have a right to information, and you have a right to determine who you trust. Lindsay Snell, a journalist I believe is based in Turkey right now. I'm not entirely sure where Lindsay is based out of. Twitter ban on RT in the EU now implemented. I'm sure such measures will have no deleterious effect on freedom of expression here in the long run. Yeah, sarcasm. Banning RT? Take a look at this. On Twitter, it says RT.com's account has been withheld in Portugal, Finland, Sweden, Ireland, Slovenia, Czech Republic, Poland, Slovakia, Hungary, Italy, Malta, Germany, Greece, Romania, Netherlands, Bulgaria, Austria, Luxembourg, Latvia, Denmark, Lithuania, Croatia, Estonia, Cyprus, France, Spain, Belgium, in response to a legal demand. I think it's wrong. Let Putin speak. Let's hear what he has to say. He invaded and we know it. When Lavrov comes out and he's like, well, we didn't want Ukraine to have nuclear weapons, I laugh at the prospect. I laugh. What about Latvia and Estonia? They're on your border. They're NATO countries. Don't give me this. I don't buy it. And when he says it, I believe it just discredits them outright. Propaganda, manipulation, and control. I love this one from The Guardian. Why Vladimir Putin has already lost this war. He did he? The Russians may yet conquer Ukraine, but Ukrainians have shown in the past they will not let them hold it. Oh, wait, so you mean to say that Russia may actually conquer Ukraine? Okay, sure. From the New York Mag, the war in Ukraine looks unwinnable for everyone. Oh, and this one they say no one's going to win. I think that's actually a fair assessment because they say when you get into a pissing contest, nobody wins and everyone gets pissed on. I believe that's a reality here. Nobody's going to win here. But maybe that's what Russia's plan really is. Russia knew they were going to lose, and they said, take a stalemate. Russia's willing to make very serious sacrifices to make sure that the West, NATO, the U.S. doesn't win. In which case, that could be seen as some kind of victory for Russia, a big ask, as it were. Go in for the conquer, but when you lose, at least you stopped the West. To me, that's horrifying. Now, where do we go in the long run? Take a look at this. Where the war goes. Biden to tout chip investments in State of the Union address. He did. He said we're investing in silicon chips because demand is too high. To me, this signals we're going to lose Taiwan. And that makes me wonder about what happens with Ukraine. It makes me wonder about the U.S., the stability of the U.S., and the control that the U.S. can have over the world. And it seems like not for long. Let's talk about how this is impacting civilians. From timcast.com. Former U.S. ambassador to Russia, Michael McFaul, claims there are no innocent Russians. Former U.S. ambassador is facing extreme pushback from all over the political spectrum. Many people responded to his tweet pointing out this is the same logic that has long emboldened terror organizations. Michael McFaul tweeted, there are no more innocent, neutral Russians anymore. Everyone has to make a choice. Support or oppose this war. The only way to end this war is if hundreds of thousands, not thousands, protest against the senseless war. Putin can't arrest you all. Journalist Ali Ahmed, who exposed the Pentagon's botched translation of the bin Laden tape in December of 2001 and discovered the video of Daniel Pearl's murder, responded to McFaul by pointing out this logic was the same as the al-Qaeda leader. Others pointed to the sharp turn McFaul has made from previous tweets, where he claimed that citizens are not responsible for their leaders' actions. He tweeted, "I'm always careful to criticize Putin's policies, but not Russian people. Pundits and politicians must try harder to distinguish between criticisms of Xi's policies and the Chinese people." Glenn Greenwald said, "No such thing as an innocent Russian person anymore," says Obama's former ambassador. Seems like that premise, if accepted, could lead to some extremely dark places. Regardless of the outcomes, the claim itself is noxious. Well, here we go. Man Triathlon. They've issued a statement saying they stand in solidarity with the people of Ukraine, their athletes and community, and condemns the actions dictated by Russian leadership. In line with the recommendation of the International Olympic Committee and the World Triathlon regarding the participation of Russia and Belarusian athletes in international competition, the Ironman Group, effective immediately, will disallow participation of Russian and Belarusian athletes in the 2022 Ironman, 70.3 World Championships in St. George, Utah, and 2 Ironman World Championship events taking place in St. George, Utah, and Kona, Hawaii. We have this from Axios. EA Sports to remove Russian teams from FIFA NHL video game. Why? What is the purpose of this? To me, I find it all very strange. We've heard claims that Russians should be banned from colleges, Russian citizens should be deported, vandalism of Russian American clubs. It's insane. Are we to believe that the people in America who are of Russian descent are a threat to us? Is there something we should do to make sure they don't sabotage? Perhaps they should be put in camps? It's horrifying, isn't it? Let's talk about real war. In World War II, the U.S. put Japanese people in internment camps over fears that some of them could be spies or saboteurs. In Ukraine, when the war broke out, it was reported that there were Russian special forces already operating in the heart of Ukraine. And there were several attacks in several major cities. That is to suggest that there were infiltrators already. This is why you have war hysteria. It's why people make camps. It's why there's just you get it. Because they're concerned that these people who are Russian are loyal to Putin. And is this what they've been building us up to? This has been the goal of all of this. Glenn Greenwald says a large online site for live sports scores for multiple sports announces it will, for the foreseeable future, exclude all scores for any competitions which include Russian athletes. It's downright insane. It's downright insane. I like this post from Matthew Iglesias. He says, "I'm in D.C., so I figure the nuclear blast is going to take me out, but if I lived someplace more plausibly survivable, I'd try to make sure I knew something about how to grow potatoes." Good point, Matthew. We're very far outside of the blast radius of D.C., but we're far enough away, but still within a target zone of any kind of nuclear attack. Matthew Iglesias posts this prepperfortress.com map of nuclear targets, and you can see that there are many. Apparently, Oregon is the best place to be because they have the least nuclear targets, no shelter required. But if you are in West Virginia, Maryland, D.C., you need a shelter. Now, I will point out this map is kind of hard to read, but we can see that in the area of Northwest Maryland and West Virginia, you only need about a couple days of shelter. So I think we're pretty good there in the event of a nuclear attack. But the question is, would Russia nuke D.C.? I believe the answer is no. I really do not believe it. Vladimir Putin wants to win a war. He doesn't want to blow up millions of civilians. That means that if this is going to be a nuclear war, we are going to see tactical deployment of nuclear weapons and artillery, gravity bombs. I don't know about ICBMs. We may see like a multiple independently targeting reentry vehicle, a MIRV, but not used to wipe out cities. That doesn't seem to make sense. Vladimir Putin wants to control what he wants to control. Certainly, Hitting DC in the digital era would not stop anything. But Vladimir Putin could target military sites throughout Europe with 1 or 2 nukes. Submarines are poised around coasts, and they're more likely going to try to stop military power as opposed to bomb civilians. That is to say, I don't think we're going to see nukes hitting DC. I don't believe that makes sense. If you go back to the Cold War, centralized communications were really important. I mean, that's what we had. Communication was centralized. So although we had like emergency bunkers and designated survivors and things like that, if Russia in, say, the 60s were to nuke DC, yeah, it would basically cripple the United States. If someone were to nuke DC today, it wouldn't. It wouldn't. That's why January 6th was stupid. These people thought going into a government building would change anything. Government can operate from anywhere, can communicate from anywhere. If a nuke dropped on DC, they'd pop up in, I don't know, Denver and just be like, we're operating as normal. We've got our chambers set up. And I'll be honest, I'm willing to bet the U.S. has voting chambers for the Senate, for the House, for the Supreme Court, and for the federal government as contingency plans, probably in other locations. In the event of a nuclear strike, the government, I assure you, can operate and function as is, even if cities get hit. That's possible. They may try to hit cities, or cities could be collateral damage. I don't see why they'd strike New York. I don't see why we'd strike Moscow. I think the theater for this war will remain in Eastern Europe, but that could ultimately resolve in serious damage in Europe. I don't know that it will hit anything outside of Europe. So it's bad news for a very dense civilian population in the European continent. In the end, I can say we'll see how it plays out, and I'll leave it there. Next segment's coming up at youtube.com/TimCastIRL at 8 p.m. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all then.